And welcome to our author book talk presented by the Westland Historical Society. We appreciate both members and non-members and folks who may not even be familiar with Historical Society as we're able to do this virtually. So I'm really excited to welcome my friend and a local Westland author, Waka T. Brown, to join us today. The format today is going to be, I'm going to do a very quick introduction, and then I'm going to begin asking some questions about this book. And I have to mention, I read this book recently and I really loved it. And I will continue to remind you all that it's a great book to read, and we'll get there in a few minutes. After I've asked and we've kind of gone through our readings, a reading and some questions, we'll certainly open it up to questions, and feel free at any point to put those in the chat if you'd like. You can also ask them verbally at the end if you'd like. So first, a little bit about Waka. She's a Stanford graduate with a BA in International Relations and a master's in secondary education. While I Was Away is her debut novel, just came out in 2021. So congratulations, that's always exciting. She was the first American born in her family and was raised in Topeka, Kansas. Grew up speaking both Japanese and English. While I Was Away is her memoir about when her parents made sure she didn't lose her Japanese by sending her to Japan to live with her grandmother when she was 12 years old. In addition to writing middle grade stories, she writes screenplays. She is currently an online instructor with the Stanford program on international and cross-cultural education called SPICE. And she teaches about US-Japan relations to high school students in Japan, and has also authored curriculum on several international topics. I did need to add that I didn't know this, Waka received the US-Japan Foundation and Engage Asia's National 2019 Elgin Hines Outstanding Teacher Award. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So welcome, and maybe just to start off, maybe you can just speak with us a little bit about what led your dad to immigrate to the United States.
So thank you very much, Dee Dee, for organizing this, and many thanks to the Westland Historical Society for having me speak today. And my dad is a psychiatrist, and he was interested in learning more about psychiatry. And during the late 1960s, early 1970s, mental health wasn't, treatment for mental health, I think, was much more advanced in the United States than in Japan. And so for that reason, he wanted to do his residency in the United States. And so I believe it was 1970. Yeah, it was around 1970 when he applied for and was able to come over here and start his residency.
Great, I had to unmute myself there. That's interesting. So was there a particular event or thought that really made you decide to put this story on paper? You know, it's one thing to have these life experiences, and then, you know, comes a time when it's a big deal to start to write. And so maybe you can tell us about that. And if you want to talk about your process of writing as well, that would be interesting.
Okay. So, you know, as you mentioned, I write screenplays, and that's actually the medium I started out writing in. And screenplays, in my mind, are really fun to write. They're actually quite quick. But the likelihood of one of them getting picked up and made into a feature-length movie is actually pretty slim. And so I write because I enjoy it, but I also, after a while, was kind of thinking, yeah, it'd be great if like more than 2 people were able to like see my screenplay, because it really is like an executive at a studio will read it, and if you're lucky, that person will pass it on to their supervisor or someone higher up in the company, and they might read it. And that's usually where it ended. And so after, many years of this, I was talking with a studio exec, and I was talking about a screenplay I'd written. And he's like, not for me, but is there anything else you're thinking about writing? Like, what's been on your mind? And so this story had always been kind of in the back burner. I'd always thought about, like, maybe I should write about it. And like in that moment when I was talking with him, I thought to myself, oh, I really had no idea what I was going to write. So I just kind of pulled this out of my hat and I said, oh, yeah, I've always been meaning to write about this experience. And he actually like perked up and he's like, oh, yeah, you should write about that. And just with my experience writing screenplays and knowing the market and the purchasing and everything, I knew it wasn't something I should write in a screenplay format. Like, I feel like short stories are best suited for adapting into a screenplay. And I felt like there was more meat in this story than I could fit into a screenplay. Plus, I had no desire to see my 12-year-old self like played out on screen. And so I was like, well, it's a very different way of writing than what I'm used to. And so I decided I would take a memoir writing class. And that was actually through Literary Arts in Portland. So.
And I am really interested, and maybe you'll get to this later if it doesn't fit now, but, as you did that memoir writing class, was there a point when you thought it would be from an adult memoir as compared to a memoir for middle school? And I find it so interesting thinking about how different, that would be writing it. So maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, the memoir boot camp was mainly geared towards adults because I think that's the whole memoir writing style is you're kind of looking back and not reminiscing so much as reflecting on things that had happened to you. And not many kids are old enough to do that. And so a lot of other adults in the class were writing about events that happened to them as kids, but it was in like kind of an adult fashion meant for adults. Just in my research about memoirs too, like I think they're a tough sell sometimes if you're not famous, because like that's what is always like pointed out when you're querying, do you have a platform? Like, are you famous basically, and can you bring all these readers along with you who are interested in hearing your story? And so I kind of felt like, well, the protagonist is 12 years old. I really don't know if there are going to be many adults who are going to be interested in what happened as a 12, to me as a 12-year-old, whereas a lot of 12-year-olds who might not have traveled overseas or who might be kind of bicultural like I am might have more of an interest in this story. And so there is a huge shift. Like after I wrote the first draft, it felt very much like a memoir. And I believe now that I look back, it was much more geared towards an adult voice. It was a memoir voice. And so when I went through an extensive rewrite, that switched. I read a bunch of middle grade novels. I kind of tried to hear that middle grade voice. And it was a page one rewrite from like really the first scene to the end. And the reason I did that was someone had told me about this. It's a writing initiative. It's free, but it's called Pitch Wars. And someone suggested I apply because it's for unagented, unpublished authors. And so I was like, well, I have gone as far as I can with this manuscript by myself. Like, I don't know what else to do with it. And so I applied to that and I was accepted. And my mentor for that is a published middle grade author. And so she was like, okay, we need to kick this memoir voice off to the curb. We need to restructure this. You need to read a lot of middle grade novels, and we need to make it sound more like middle grade in order for middle grade students to be interested in it. So that was a very intense 4-month process that I went through.
Yeah, I can't imagine. And, I'm thinking of my own memoir where and there are a lot of memoirs and they are hard to sell. Speaking from experience, but I have my 12-year-old voice in there as an adult looking back, right? So I really appreciated that when I read this book, it really did sound like a 12-year-old voice, and yet quite sophisticated to me, which I think kids are sophisticated today, right? And maybe we can get to that.
Yeah.
This might be a great time for reading.
Okay.
Do you have a part that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. So I thought since this is a historical society meeting, I would choose something with a little bit of a historical bent. And, you know, kids these days, they can like FaceTime each other and text each other. But when I was in Japan, it was all letters. And at the very fastest, a letter would get to me in 4 days from the United States, usually a little bit longer, and vice versa. So if I wrote something, I, at the very earliest, could expect a response in 8 days. And so this is during the summer vacation in Japan, because Japanese students have a much shorter summer vacation. And so this is when I'm writing letters to my friends. So in the remaining weeks of my break from school, I tried to keep my head above water by writing letters mostly. I dated one batch of letters to my friends 1983 and not 1984. Would my friends notice how silly that was? I'm so bored, I'm going to circle all the prepositional phrases in Ivanhoe, I wrote. Would they realize I was joking, or would they think I was so bored that I actually did that? Clearly, I was hilarious. Would they think so too? I'd have to wait at least 8 days to find out. After I wrote as many letters to as many people I could, I tried to teach Taro how to say something in English. And Taro is my grandmother's myna bird. Taro-chan, say hello, Waka. Come on, Taro-chan. Hello, Waka. Kakarururu. Hello, Waka, I repeated. Konnichiwa. Come on, Taro-chan. Maybe if I fed him, he'd like me more, I thought. Maybe that would help him learn. Obasama, which is grandmother, was open to the idea. Well, if you're going to feed him, you might as well clean the bottom of his cage while you're at it. I took the poopy, soupy, soiled, wet newspaper pages out from the bottom of his cage and replaced them with fresh ones. I filled his feeder with his bird food that reminded me of gray Cocoa Puffs. I tried something different. Taro, say hi. My name is Taro. He hopped back and forth in his cage and snapped his beak, clack, clack, at me. Come on, say hi, my name is Taro. I filled his water bowl. He cocked his head at me and didn't respond. Instead, he chomp, closed his beak over my finger as I latched the door to his cage shut. I yelped and yanked my hand away. Kora, Obasama shouted at Taro. Good morning, responded Taro. Stupid bird, I muttered to myself as I let Obasama tend to Taro. She never asked me about my finger or to help with Taro again, and that was fine by me. I guess Taro and I would never be friends. 2 weeks until school, 13 days, 12. For some reason, it was this time more than any other that it began to strike me just how long I'd been away. Letters from home, each one like a life ring, kept me afloat. My brother wrote about the presidential race heating up at home. He mentioned the Democratic nominee was considering a woman for his vice president. A woman vice president? That would be cool. Apparently, he also convinced my parents to get an Apple IIe computer while I was away. So, a little great historical section to show us how far and how long that took us.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I've told you this after reading, but there's so much humor in here. And I asked you if you were a funny kid, because it really certainly shows through in a lot of your dialogue, which really brings me to my next question. And people who write memoir are asked this: how true is it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some folks will say, well, it's only as true as what your memories are. And we all remember things differently. And so, some people work off letters and diaries. And I'd love to hear kind of what you used and how true you think this is to your experience.
Okay, so I do have a pretty good memory. Some people have remarked on that, Short term for like things I'm supposed to do, like things around the house, maybe not as good, but I do have a pretty good memory about kind of like significant events. And so I did rely on my memory for a lot of these things. I also kept a journal. Granted, a 12-year-old's journal is not as descriptive as I'd hoped it would be, because I remember looking through this and kind of cursing my 12-year-old self for my lack of detail in some of these cases. But, you know, I do have record of what degree it was on certain days in August of 1984. But I would say that some things that I had to change for the sake of story, for instance, is, you know, life doesn't always occur in like a 3-act structure. And so a lot of it, like that I didn't know exactly when it happened. For instance, the section where my grandmother is having a nightmare and she wakes me up in the middle of the night because she's screaming. I don't remember exactly when that happened. I know it happened because it scared, you know, it scared the bejesus out of me. But I don't remember if that was the first week or the second week or the third week, you know. And so for the sake of story, I put it where it made the most sense for a story arc. So in terms of pacing, like, yeah, like I would move certain things so that it would fit with pacing. But the events are true, you know, the events are all true and they occurred roughly where I remember them happening. So I would say the hardest part of the memoir writing is deciding what to put in, because even though this is a 5-month period, which is a relatively short amount of time and a good length to cover for a memoir, I had to leave a lot of stuff out because I was like, well, this doesn't really fit in with the story. It was interesting or traumatic or whatever to me at the time, but it doesn't really fit into basically the 3 elements of the book were my relationship with school, my relationship with Japan as a whole, and my relationship with my grandmother. So if it didn't fit into one of those 3 threads, I really didn't like, I was like, I really can't justify putting this in, even though it was very interesting to me. So I think it's, you know, when you tell stories to your kids too, you have to like, is this really interesting to them or is this interesting only to me? So that is one aspect that, you know, was hard, as I did have to leave some stuff out.
Well, and that's such a great point to bring up for anybody here who's thinking of writing their own story. And I know there's at least one person who's talked about it, is memoir. You know, that's what we're warned about, right? Is there's all this stuff in your life. It's not a biography. It's about this theme or this point in time, and you have all these great stories, but you have to decide. And I think that can be very hard as a writer, for sure. Yeah, I'll be curious. I mean, did you, I know you have 3 sons, and I don't know what ages they were while you were working on this, but did you ever go to them for feedback during the writing part, or not so much?
I find myself going to them more right now when I'm writing something different. But since this was my life and my experiences with it, I didn't really go to them for this one. Um, but for currently what I'm writing, I definitely say, hey, so at middle school, would this happen at recess? At middle school, are kids doing this kind of stuff? And, you know, what I'm finding is, you know, middle schoolers are a lot more, yeah, as you mentioned, sophisticated than a lot of people give them credit for. And not many kids are like, oh, this was too highbrow for me or sophisticated, because I mean, I'm looking at this and I was 12 years old and I was reading Ivanhoe. It was, you know, I was reading Ivanhoe. I remember another one of the books that I read during that time was Mists of Avalon, which was, you know, it was not a middle grade book. It
Pretty grown up book.
Yeah, it was a pretty grown up book. And I don't think my parents realized, you know, they knew I really enjoyed the King Arthur legend. And they were like, this is 700 pages. Let's send it to her. This should keep her busy. But yeah, I mean, middle grade students, 12-year-olds are, I think they're capable of a lot of sophisticated thought and feelings. And
Yeah, yeah. I think I've shared before that I read Catcher in the Rye when I was about 11 because it was the book still on the bookshelf.
yeah,
I didn't understand any of it.
yeah.
Before we get to talk, I do want to hear about your next work, but before we do, I really want to acknowledge, the contract you did get with HarperCollins, or you do have, which is a really big deal. That's one of the big press. And I don't know if you want to share with us anything about that, in terms of securing it, or how you feel about it, or anything. I just know it's a big name.
Oh, okay. So the writing initiative that I was accepted to, Pitch Wars, is pretty well known. Unbeknownst to me when I applied for it, I was extremely lucky to be accepted to it. Apparently, only 3 to 4% of applicants are paired with a mentor. And so I'm sure there are a lot of people who are like, she didn't even know about it and she got a position, like curses. But I don't know. I kind of feel like my years in the trenches writing screenplays with not much success. I was like, I earned it, But with Pitch Wars, at the end of the 3 to 4 month writing period and revising period, there is this agent round. And so that's when a lot of agents who have signed up are invited to preview excerpts from the work of about 100 writers, and then request full manuscripts. And this writing initiative has gotten so much attention as of late that the agents are very quick to read your material and to try and pick up clients. And so that's how I was able to find my agent. And if you are looking to go with like one of the big 5 publishers or one of the larger indie ones, I think it's very hard to do without an agent. And so when I was looking at the sub list of publishing houses that my agent was submitting to, they were all, HarperCollins, Random House, Crown, Macmillan. And I was shocked because I was like, wow, like I had no idea that my book could be received, because in my mind, it was kind of a small story at any of these. And my agent just had a really good relationship, I think, with a lot of these editors. And I think the reputation of your agent has a lot to do with how quickly your material is read as well. Because I remember some of the fellow writers in the program laughed at me when I said, oh, my agent said I needed to turn in my revised draft by Friday because she wants the publishing houses to read it over the weekend. And she was like, ha, ha, ha. They were laughing because they were like, editors will never read something over the weekend. They're like, no way. Expect to be on submission with these publishing houses for months or longer. And so I was kind of sitting back because I was like, well, my agent did say that, like, it'd be read over the weekend. And then between that Friday, I submitted it, and the time I sold it was actually 3 weeks, which was an amazingly short time to be on sub. And I think it's because my agent has a reputation of her clients' work often goes to auction. And so if they don't read it right away, they won't even get the chance. And so I was lucky because there was more than one house that wanted it. And so she was able to arrange an auction. And when that's the case, I think the publishing houses, they'll move faster because they know that if they lose, then, there's a possibility that they might lose out. So I was very lucky to only be on sub for 3 weeks because there were people from the same writing initiative who close to a year, they were on submission with work that I think was much better than mine. So I was very lucky.
It's a great story. And yeah, yours is probably the best story I've heard, from people I know who did get on with someone so quickly, a large press. So congrats, that's great.
Thank
And I
you.
know there's a second book coming. And so before I ask you your kind of, I think one of my last questions, I would invite folks, if you're starting to think about other questions, or please do start to think about other questions, and you'll be able to ask them either by unmuting yourself or putting it in the chat, either way. But before we do that, I'd love to hear about your next work. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about, what it is and kind of maybe the expected timing, if you have a sense of that.
Okay. So in addition to having a really short submission period, my agent was able to arrange a 2-book deal. And I remember at the time telling my agent, I don't have a second book. And she's like, don't worry. She's like, do you think you could write another middle grade book? And I was like, ooh. And she's like, don't worry, you'll have an editor working with you. The process will be a lot faster. And I was like, okay. And so she's like, cool. And she got me a 2-book deal.
Wow.
Even though they didn't have an idea of what I wanted to write for my second book. And so for my second book, once copy edits were kind of going through for my first book, they were like, okay, well, just send us a few ideas. And so I really just kind of sent a few ideas. One was one that I'd already written as a screenplay. And I was really hoping they'd choose that one because I was like, at least it's written. Because a screenplay is like an outline. I was thinking, I think I could write this pretty quickly. I sure hope so. I sure want them to choose it. And they're like, no, we don't think so. How about this other one, which is one I just kind of thought of. And it's fiction, but it is based in like the late 1980s with a Japanese American 12-year-old protagonist in Kansas. And I would say like with similarities to my life, there are some, but I do want to stress that it's fiction. And so it's kind of I would say, a deconstruction of the American dream, the idea that you can be anything that you want to be, but from the viewpoint of an immigrant. And if that's really true for all families and all people in the US, or just for people who look a certain way or have certain advantages. And so the main character wants to be an actress. And so she isn't aware that there were basically no Asians, or very, very few Asians on screen. And so I thought about this as kind of like, that we always say representation matters. And I've noticed and I've heard some people say things like, completely serious, like, well, I know, my friend's daughter won't get this modeling job because she's blonde, and people want someone ethnic looking these days. And I remember being very shocked at like, I look on TV and I still see people who are blonde, in their acting roles. And I open a magazine, like, I don't think there's also more diversity, but I was remembering when I heard that, I was like, oh, there's not a real clear understanding as to how it was, and how having no representation or bad representation is extremely harmful, And so that's the idea from which my second story was created.
Wow, really interesting and important and timely. How are you doing on that?
Well, so it took me, I started writing while I was away in 2016, and it finally published in 2021. So that was 5 years, right? I started writing Dream Annie Dream last June, and I turned in my first draft at the end of October. And that's pretty much what they expect for like a first draft. And so I remember being a little overwhelmed at the prospect of it. But my agent was right. I worked with my editor. I bounced ideas off of her. and she steered me in the correct direction right from the beginning. So there was less like meandering, to get to that point. So I was put on a good direction, and then I thought, well, middle grade novels are around 55,000 words. I have X amount of time to get this done, so I need to average about 600 words a day, which is about 2.5 pages. And I was like, I can write about 2.5 pages a day. Like if I sit down and I really work at it, I can do 2.5 pages a day. And when I could, I'd write more, so I'd have some leeway. And so I was able to turn something in at the end of October, just from kind of that process. But I doubted whether I could do it, but I did. So I was very pleased.
That's terrific. Yeah. Well, nothing like having I guess a deadline, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I look forward to that for sure. Um, yeah, thank you for sharing. I didn't know what your next book was going to be on, so I enjoy hearing about that. So I guess I would kind of I'll ask you if there's something else you'd like to tell us, and then I'd also just ask if there's anyone on the call or on the video that would love to share a question. Either feel free to unmic yourself or unmute yourself or write in the chat. Maybe we'll see if there's a question first. And there's one from Beth Smullins. What did you learn from your stay in Japan that has stayed with you? Well, that's a great question.
Well, the original purpose for my mom sending me to Japan was to improve my Japanese language skills. And there really is something about kids learning languages as opposed to adults learning languages. And so even though my older sister and brother were born in Japan, my Japanese is better than theirs. And a lot of this I attribute to my 5-month stay when I was 12, because I remember a significant improvement in my Japanese. Like when I returned home, I was speaking with my parents in Japanese almost all the time. And that wasn't the case before I left. So I would definitely say I took some Japanese language with me. I also think that I became very resilient. Like I think after an experience when you're that young and largely alone for that much time, that it makes you very strong and able to do things that maybe you didn't think you'd be able to do. So, but thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. And I might do a little follow-up question to that. Knowing how you portrayed how much you did not want to go to Japan when you were told that you were going. I'm curious, when you did return, was there ever a time where you, kind of thanked your parents, acknowledged your parents? Probably
No.
not openly, right?
No. I never said, wow, that was really great that you did that.
Yeah. I didn't think so, but I did want to ask. Okay, thank you.
No. I think it's just kind of understood, just because like looking at the language loss that's happened among my siblings. I think they know, I know, it's, but they also understand, I think, the difficulties. I would still say even now it's a very patriarchal type of society. I didn't feel that as much when I was a kid, actually. I felt it much more when I went back and worked there as an adult. And that was difficult in a completely different way. But yeah.
Yeah, and you speak to some of that. You speak to, the comfort level of, hugging or, being kind of emotionally available in that sense. I enjoyed that. Other questions, anyone? And I think go ahead.
Well, I was going to write it, but I actually have a follow-up question that is unrelated. I'm very interested and really will look forward to reading your book, but I'm kind of interested to find out what were the things from reading middle grade books? What had the most impact because on how you structured your story towards middle-aged kids? Was it vocabulary or plot, or simplifying the thought process? I just wouldn't even know how. I'm a technical writer, pretty much, just news and that kind of stuff, but I just find telling a story to a middle schooler that they would want to. What were the things from the books that you said, okay, this is I need to remember this?
I mean, there are some very technical aspects that are easy to grasp, which are, short and fast paragraphs. And I was like, okay, got it. Another thing people mentioned were like fun descriptions, like this one description I just used in this work I'm using was like, oh, her hair is messy. And I was like, oh, it's messy like a bowl of spaghetti dropped on the floor. And I'm like, okay, that's middle grade, keeping things fun. And also, my mentor pointed out certain things that, since it was my life, I didn't really think it was all that interesting. But like, there's this scene in which I'm eating noodles with my grandmother. And in Japan, you slurp your noodles. And she's like, that's fun, really like point to that. And so, I have a 12 and 13-year-old at home too, and I kind of see the type of things that they're interested in. And so there's a little bit, not too much, but of potty humor in there as well. Like, I think that's after reading a lot of middle grade, you just kind of get a sense of like, okay, like relationship difficulties, friendship difficulties. And I think it has to be kept lively. Like somber, like literary fiction, beautiful prose, for example. I don't think middle grade readers are really all that interested in, but fun, like fun prose, fun descriptions. That's definitely something that I came away with. But I guess it depends on what kind of material you're interested in too, because my boys have been reading a lot of, I feel like it's fantasy. I really don't. I'm not a big like Tolkien fan or anything, so I've never been drawn to that, and I don't know what grabs people about those books. But I guess it's just the type of book that you read that you can kind of find different elements that are interesting for different readers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. That was another interesting question. And I would just say, thinking about it, I think the part I most identified with, kind of with my 12-year-old memories, were the social pieces, the friendships. I thought you did that really well. And you did it as a new kid in a foreign land. But kind of I had my own 12-year-old as a new kid in a new school. And so I think some of that to me seemed so real. And I'd be curious, would it be real to a 12-year-old of today, where issues are really different in friendship, not just the technology, but the other things? So
yeah, when I was reading the middle grade books that I did, I got the sense that yes, it's still an issue. I don't have girls, so I think it's a little bit different with girls. My boys seem to be doing okay, and honestly, the younger two haven't been in physical school for a while, and they only just returned. So I've sometimes told them, I'm sorry you're missing school, but you're not really missing the best school years of your life. So I think they've avoided some of the middle school drama, but I think it's definitely still there.
And I've heard that from some of my friends with middle schoolers, that their kids have kind of enjoyed a little bit of being a little bit away. That's not all middle schoolers, for sure.
No.
Yeah. Well, thanks. There is another question from Roger. Do you have a time set each day when you write in a particular room in your house? So that's such a great question.
Well, I am lucky to have an office because I actually work from home for my job as well. So that's just, that's where I am able to close the door and write. But in terms of a particular time, and no, I don't have that. I don't have that. The three boys definitely keep me busy. My work keeps me really busy. So, if I'm going to write, I know I can't write while my class is in session. So January through the end of June is really hard to get much done at all. But luckily, like for my second book, I started that at the end of June and was able to finish at the end of October, which is a bit of a slower time for work. And the kids aren't in school, and they weren't in school last year at that time. So I write when I can, hopefully a few times a week. But I am lucky to have a space where I can do it. And I'm lucky too, because my kids are largely self-sufficient. I know parents with toddlers have had a really hard time this year.
But still, it's really impressive. You have a full-time job and, three kids, a family, and, you're working on getting your second book out. So that's really terrific. I really want to, acknowledge that and congratulate you again. I want to make sure if there's anything else you want to share with us, Waka, besides, do you have favorite bookstores that you like people to buy your books, or wherever they can get them?
Well, the bookstore that I had my launch with was Annie Bloom's Books. And I don't know if they have any signed stock there anymore, but if they do, that's where you could get it. And otherwise, anywhere you can get it. I know if you buy from Amazon, then you can also leave a review. So Amazon, I think, promotes your book a little more if it has 50 reviews or more. And so right now I'm at 26. So if anybody wants to leave a review, if you buy from Amazon.
And you can leave a review on Amazon even if you didn't buy your book there.
Oh, really?
As long as you buy some things from Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want a signed book plate, just email me and let me know. And I'm happy to send that to you for participating in the session too.
Great. Well, thank you. And it looks like, there's one more question or a comment. Oh, yes. If you purchase from Amazon Smile, then the Westland Historical Society gets a small percentage. So thank you, Danny, I think shared that with us. And I think on that note, just very appreciative that you could join us today, Waka. And again, I'm thrilled to be able to help promote your book.
Yes,
It's really a fun one. And so thank you all. This will be recorded, and we will keep you posted on another author event coming up soon.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming.